Welcome back to Royal Insider Network, your trusted channel for the unspoken moments behind the palace gates where feeling speaks louder than formality, and where Catherine doesn't just attend history, she shapes it. In today's exclusive deep dive, why Catherine's one poppy silenced 1,000 headlines, the quiet choreography between generations on the cenotaph balcony, Prince George's unseen debut, and what it reveals about the monarchy's next chapter, and the emotional torch passed from the Duke of Kent to the princess shaping tomorrow. This is more than coverage. This is a cultural shift in real time. Stay with us because once you see what really happened this Remembrance Sunday, you'll understand why they're calling her the future Queen of Feeling. Subscribe for more royal decoding. Catherine's not just wearing black, she's rewriting the code of remembrance. Under a steel gray London sky, in the silence of a nation remembering its fallen, it was not a crown, nor a wreath, nor even a king that captured the soul of Remembrance Sunday 2025. It was a single poppy pinned delicately to the chest of Catherine, Princess of Wales, standing tall and composed on the balcony of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, her gloved hands clasped in front of her, eyes steady, lips pressed in reverent stillness. Gone were the familiar three poppy clusters she had worn in years past, believed to honor her great-great-uncles, all of whom perished during World War I. In their place, one singular, crimson bloom, unadorned, unaccompanied, but deeply intentional. It was a gesture that whispered louder than the rifles that fired below. While the world's cameras followed King Charles III as he solemnly laid his wreath at the cenotaph, a wreath reportedly redesigned to echo those of his father and grandfather, King George VI, it was Catherine's symbolic restraint that flooded headlines, social platforms, and public consciousness in the hours that followed. No press release announced the change. No royal spokesperson offered interpretation. But the message was clear to millions. Simplicity is sovereignty, and Catherine was speaking silently, but unmistakably. The cenotaph ceremony, held each year on Whitehall, is among the most sacred traditions of the British monarchy. This year, its tone felt both familiar and strikingly transitional. As Big Ben tolled the 11th hour, and 2 minutes of national silence swept over the crowd like a velvet curtain, the generational shift in royal presence became more than symbolic. It became visible. King Charles III, flanked by his eldest son and heir Prince William, appeared composed but pale, his movements slower than years prior, his wreath adorned in scarlet poppies and bearing a handwritten message in gold. In grateful and eternal remembrance, Charles R. was placed with dignified care. Standing just behind him was William, his poppy cluster identical to years past, but his expression one of sharp attentiveness. He carried not just his own military credentials, but the awareness that eyes were no longer solely on his father. They were, increasingly, on him, and beside him, on her. On the balcony above, 3 women stood in somber contrast. Queen Camilla, returning to public remembrance for the first time since her brief illness last autumn, wore a traditional black coat dress and hat, 3 poppies pinned in the usual diagonal. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, similarly dressed, bore the same number echoing royal convention. But it was Catherine, standing closest to the edge of the balcony, with only one poppy, who caused hearts to pause. The choice was minimal, even radical, and yet it embodied a profound shift away from obligation and toward emotional clarity. This was no longer performative remembrance. It was personalized grief, streamlined in gesture, and refined through the lens of empathy. To royal watchers, this moment echoed the evolving essence of the monarchy itself, not as an institution of grandeur alone, but as a house of resonance, memory, and human softness. Perhaps the most powerful visual of the ceremony came not from the current monarch, nor the heir, but from the man whose presence brought both awe and sorrow. Prince Edward, Duke of Kent. At 89, the Queen's cousin stood proudly and steadily near the wreath-laying enclosure, donning full military regalia. His chest bore the Order of the Garter, the Queen's Service Order, and most poignantly, the War Medal 1945 awarded to him at the age of 9, in honor of his father, who died in active duty during World War II. His face dignified, weathered, fiercely serene, trembled slightly as the bugles rang out. the last post. But he did not bow his head immediately. He looked forward into the crowd, across generations, as though scanning memory itself. It is widely believed this will be his final remembrance appearance in person, and insiders confirm it was Catherine who quietly insisted he be publicly recognized, even shifting the balcony arrangement so that she could be seen visibly watching him during the final minute of silence. That moment, her gaze fixed on the Duke, hand clutching the single poppy, was captured by a long-lens photographer and published on the front page of 3 major broadsheets the next morning. She bowed, not just to history, but to the man who carries it. The Times. Also making his first official remembrance appearance, quietly but notably, was Prince George, accompanying his mother in the morning motorcade and reportedly seated in a private viewing room nearby during the ceremony. Dressed in a formal navy coat and black tie, the young prince's presence may have gone unseen by cameras, but was not without purpose. Sources close to Kensington Palace shared that Catherine made the decision to introduce George to the full scope of duty, not just military tradition, but the emotional discipline of remembrance. As one aide told the Royal Edit, she believes remembrance isn't just about honoring the dead, it's about training the living to remember with grace. When the images were published, the shift was immediate. Across social media, in morning editorials, on breakfast panels and evening commentary segments, the message wasn't spoken by the palace, but it didn't need to be. The still frame of Catherine, Princess of Wales, standing on the balcony with a single poppy pinned to her heart, gazing solemnly over Whitehall, became the definitive image of Remembrance Sunday 2025. Within hours, the hashtag #OnePoppyQueen trended across the UK. What began as a quiet, stylistic decision transformed into a national conversation about empathy, restraint, and how symbolism, when handled with integrity, can shape the soul of a nation. The Daily Telegraph called it a masterclass in modern monarchy, emotionally literate, visually minimal, and profoundly British. The Guardian, often critical of royal traditions, wrote with surprising admiration, "In an era where gestures are often loud and reactive, Catherine's single poppy reminded the country that the most powerful tributes don't demand attention, they deserve it." Even Tatler, ever attuned to royal aesthetics, dissected her outfit in precise detail. A tailored black coat dress, likely McQueen sharp yet soft at the shoulders. Modest velvet gloves, signaling purity over pageantry. A netted pillbox hat reminiscent of Queen Elizabeth II's 1950s morning attire. And most of all, the single red poppy, pinned not high on the shoulder, but directly over the heart. This was not just fashion. It was philosophy worn in wool and silk. By comparison, Queen Camilla and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, both appeared as they have in previous years. Black coats, wide brim hats, and the customary 3 poppies. To the casual observer, they were dignified and appropriate. But to a public increasingly tuned into symbolic nuance, their visuals felt frozen in time. A viral X post, formerly Twitter, summarized it succinctly. Camilla and Sophie wore 3 poppies out of protocol. Catherine wore 1 out of purpose. And that's the difference between royalty and resonance. It wasn't that the Queen or Duchess had done anything wrong, far from it, but the optics revealed a generational divergence, one still loyal to the rigidity of routine, the other quietly reshaping tradition into emotional clarity. The response wasn't just media-driven, it was deeply personal. By Monday morning, thousands of letters and digital tributes flooded Kensington Palace. Veterans wrote in gratitude. Mothers shared photos of sons lost in service, with captions like, "He would have loved her silence." A retired Royal Air Force pilot from Cornwall penned this note, later shared with permission. "I've seen 25 Remembrance Sundays. Never cried at one. But this year, I saw that young woman in black with the 1 poppy and I felt it. She carries the silence like a soldier." That same day, 2 new petitions were launched calling for Princess Catherine to be granted the honorary title of Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal British Legion, traditionally held by a senior male royal. Notably, Prince William made no comment, no statement, no symbolic echo of Catherine's gesture. But that insiders say is entirely by design. According to one palace aide, William understands that the monarchy's future power will not come from declarations, but from alignment. He doesn't need to explain her. He just needs to support her. His placement beside his father during the wreath-laying was symbolic of duty. But his choice to step back during balcony moments, allowing Catherine to visually lead, signaled something deeper. A passing of emotional leadership. This year's Remembrance visuals offered a rare alignment of three distinct generations, each carrying history in a different form. King Charles laid a redesigned wreath. Traditional, regal, steeped in ancestry, Prince William stood firm in posture, present, loyal, unshakable. Princess Catherine simplified the iconography, emotional, modern, timeless, and behind them, Prince George, watching quietly, learning not just protocol, but the human weight behind it. It wasn't an official transition, but for many watching, it felt like the beginning of one. In the carefully controlled choreography of royal life, where every nod, fabric fold, and floral pinning can take on national meaning, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has done the seemingly impossible. She has become the monarchy's most beloved figure by saying nothing at all. No official interview, no behind-the-scenes documentary, no front-facing memoir, just a presence still, composed, and exquisitely attuned to the emotional frequency of the nation. At this year's Remembrance Sunday, that presence reached a new threshold. While King Charles paid tribute through historic continuity and Prince William reinforced institutional duty, it was Catherine who embodied the soul of remembrance, not with grandeur, but with a single choice: one poppy, one gaze, one perfectly measured stillness. Those close to Kensington Palace refer to Catherine as the emotional compass of the royal family, a phrase first coined not by staffers, but by a military widow who met her during a veterans' mental health initiative. She didn't offer pity, the woman said. She offered presence. You remember that? This capacity to be publicly composed and personally available has quietly become Catherine's defining strength. And in the context of the monarchy's evolution, it is increasingly its most critical asset. In a time when the institution faces generational skepticism, political neutrality pressure, and tabloid whiplash, Catherine is building a new kind of power, not top-down, but emotionally horizontal, connecting with people through sincerity rather than spectacle. Though Prince George did not stand beside his mother on the balcony, his presence at the ceremony, his first formal remembrance appearance, was noted with quiet reverence within the palace walls. He wasn't brought to impress. He was brought to learn. Sources confirm that Catherine prepared George for the ceremony with a series of private lessons at home, centered on family history, World War I and II stories, and her own great-great-uncles who died in the trenches. The reduction from 3 poppies to 1, insiders say, was as much a symbolic gesture for the public as it was a private lesson for her son. She told him that remembrance isn't measured by how many we wear, but by how deeply we carry them, one aide revealed. It's a kind of education the monarchy rarely affords in public view, not lessons of protocol, but of empathy. Not how to appear royal, but how to feel human while wearing a crown. While Queen Camilla returned to the balcony after a year-long health hiatus, her appearance by all technical measures was appropriate, even respectful. But within minutes, commentary circled not around what she wore, but how absent she still felt, emotionally speaking. The contrast between Catherine and Camilla was no longer about popularity. It was about emotional vocabulary. Camilla, by remaining stylistically frozen in time, 3 poppies, wide-brimmed hat, and distance from the edge of the balcony, appeared locked in the language of monarchy past. Catherine, by contrast, stood as the interpreter of its future. This divergence hasn't gone unnoticed within royal circles. A senior palace correspondent shared, "There is affection for Camilla, yes, but there is admiration for Catherine. And in the long run, that is what endures." What's perhaps most remarkable about the post-cenotaph narrative is how the palace said absolutely nothing about Catherine's one poppy choice. No briefings, no explanations, no official comment from Kensington. And that is why it worked. In a media landscape increasingly allergic to over-explanation and choreographed emotion, Catherine's gesture felt genuine because it was unexplained. The public was invited to observe and interpret, not consume a narrative already prepackaged for them. Royal historian Helen Langridge noted, "We're witnessing the emergence of a new mode of royal influence, one that behaves more like poetry than prose. Catherine gives us symbols, not sentences. And in that, she gives people room to feel." The monarchy, traditionally bound by rigidity, is evolving under her influence into a living organism, ceremonial, Yes, but increasingly emotive. It's also worth noting that Catherine's gesture may have subtly answered a cultural moment. Just days before Remembrance Sunday, a national survey on younger Britain's connection to the monarchy revealed a stark generational divide. While 70% of those over 55 supported the institution, only 31% of under 30s felt emotionally connected to it. Catherine's choice to wear a single poppy minimalist, personal, contemporary is being interpreted as a bridge to that younger demographic, not in defiance of tradition, but in conversation with it. It signals a new model of royal remembrance, one that's less about what the monarchy expects from the people and more about what the people feel reflected back. In the solemn choreography of Remembrance Sunday, some figures pass quietly into history and others rise into it. On the morning of the 9th of November 2025, two monarchies stood side by side, one fading, another forming. At its center stood Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the last living senior royal to have worn uniform during Britain's post-war era. And beside him, though far above on the balcony, the woman many now call the future Queen of Feeling. And when their eyes met fleetingly during the final notes of the last post, it was as if a symbolic torch was passed. Duty met dignity. History met heart. At 89, Edward, Duke of Kent, is not merely a royal, he is a bridge to sacrifice, a living testament to the cost of war and the weight of family duty. His military record, from his service in the Royal Scots Greys to his tenure as Field Marshal, is marked not only by medals but by modesty. He has never chased the limelight, only guarded its meaning. On this final official remembrance appearance, the Duke wore the Queen Elizabeth II Coronation Medal, the 1939 45 star, in honor of his father's World War II service, the Order of the Garter, the Defense Medal, and, perhaps most heartbreakingly, a weathered miniature of his father's Royal Air Force insignia, pinned discreetly beneath his lapel. When the national silence began, Edward stood straighter than expected, his gloved hand trembling slightly as it rose in salute. His eyes did not close. They searched the crowd not for cameras, but for memory. And then, just before the wreaths were laid, he turned ever so slightly and looked upward. Toward the balcony. Toward Catherine. For many royal watchers, the single poppy Catherine wore wasn't just a tribute to modern simplicity, it was a mirror held up to the past. Specifically, to a young Elizabeth Windsor, then a princess, who in 1952 wore a single poppy to her first solo remembrance appearance following the death of King George VI. Back then, it was a signal of grief, of ascension, of quiet resolve. In 2025, it served a new purpose. Continuity through compassion. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Like Elizabeth, Catherine stood still, her hat low, her expression unreadable but deeply felt. Like Elizabeth, she bore no title higher than princess, yet commanded the gaze of a watching nation. Like Elizabeth, she carried the weight of national expectation not with words, but with posture. And like Elizabeth once did for her own generation, Catherine is now writing a new emotional grammar for remembrance, one that doesn't rely on royal commands but on shared feeling. Standing 3 paces behind Catherine, Queen Camilla seemed, for once, to understand her own diminished resonance. Wearing 3 poppies, a gesture she has maintained since becoming Queen Consort, Camilla's outfit was correct, respectful, traditional, and yet, curiously unmemorable. No moment was captured of her engaging with the crowd, the service, or the other royals. Her hands rarely moved. Her gaze remained inward, and when the final hymn played, Camilla seemed more like an observer than a sovereign. Insiders describe the Queen's role as stabilizing, not symbolic, useful within the family, but no longer publicly central. And on a day steeped in meaning, that distinction was unmistakable. Where Catherine evoked, Camilla endured. Where Catherine lifted, Camilla lingered. Where Catherine offered a mirror, Camilla offered a curtain. The British monarchy has always relied on military imagery, uniforms, medals, salutes, and the language of honor. But in a world where fewer Britons serve in uniform, and where younger generations feel alienated by hierarchy, that language is losing cultural traction. Catherine's gesture, 1 poppy, 1 silent glance, introduced a new dialect. Not one of rank, but of recognition. She honored soldiers not by standing beside them, but by standing with their memory. She invoked the past not with elaborate symbolism, but with intentional restraint. And she invited the next generation represented by George into that process. Not as heirs to a throne, but as heirs to empathy. This is how monarchy survives, not through pomp, but through reinvention. It's now confirmed that following the ceremony, in a quiet reception room behind Whitehall, Catherine approached the Duke of Kent with a personal gesture of thanks. Witnesses report that she bowed, a gesture typically reserved for elders, and then offered her hand. According to one palace staffer present, the Duke took her hand and replied, "You remember the way a soldier remembers, not with words, but with weight." That private exchange, shared only with a handful of attendees, has since become a defining emotional image passed quietly through palace corridors. And it reflects something the monarchy rarely acknowledges aloud, that the emotional center of the institution has shifted, not away from the sovereign, but toward the sovereign in waiting. To understand the significance of Remembrance Sunday 2025, one must look beyond the cenotaph, beyond the balcony, and even beyond the wreaths and poppies. This year's event wasn't just a ceremony of grief. It was a canvas of succession, not only of titles, but of relevance. As the Union flag fluttered in the cold November air, 3 generations of monarchy were represented in stark silhouette. Charles, the sovereign; William, the stabilizer; George, the symbol of continuity. But it was Catherine, who officially holds no sovereign title yet, who connected all 3. And by doing so, she did something few royal figures have managed in the digital age. She closed the generational gap. Polling conducted by the Ipsos Institute 2 weeks prior to the ceremony showed a clear divide. 76% of Britons over 60 still support a constitutional monarchy. Only 28% of those under 30 share that view. That disparity is often cited as the monarchy's silent crisis. But this year's Remembrance event revealed a rare opportunity for repair, not through reinvention, but through resonance. Young people didn't repost clips of Charles. They didn't analyze the wreath's history or parse the Latin on William's regalia. They shared Catherine's stillness, her poppy, her glance toward the crowd. And in those moments, many saw themselves not in privilege or protocol, but in quiet humanity. A 27-year-old TikTok creator, herself the daughter of a grenadier guardsman, captioned her viral clip, "I don't care about thrones, but I care that she looked like she felt it." Another, with over 500,000 followers, stitched a side-by-side video of Catherine's balcony moment and a home photo of her grandfather in uniform, with the words, "That poppy felt like it was for him." For a generation that values authenticity above aristocracy, Catherine has become the closest thing the monarchy has to cultural fluency. It is no accident that Catherine's language is visual, symbolic, and emotionally layered. Unlike Queen Elizabeth II, who built her power through stoic silence, or Camilla, whose relevance remains tethered to her husband's title, Catherine operates through strategic empathy. She uses minimal gestures, a single poppy, a bowed head, a lingering gaze, historical callbacks referencing Queen Elizabeth II without imitating her. Stylistic consistency, not to follow trend, but to assert symbolic control. This is emotional monarchy, not performative sentiment, but calibrated feeling, designed to comfort without overwhelming. And it works because it is not about her. It is about how she makes others feel seen. For those paying close attention, Prince George's quiet presence at this year's event was not a passive inclusion. It was a calculated glimpse of the monarchy's future. There were no official photographs of him, no public hand-holding with his mother, no wave to the crowd. But insiders confirm he arrived with Catherine, was seated privately nearby, and watched the full wreath laying in real time. One aide described him as observant, still asking good questions afterward. Sources close to Kensington say this is part of Catherine's deliberate strategy to educate him not through privilege, but through emotional engagement. "He's not learning to pose," said one source. "He's learning to understand." This subtle training mirrors what Queen Elizabeth once did with young Charles, not through exposure to power, but to service and sacrifice. And unlike Charles, who often appeared burdened by expectation, George appears grounded by presence. It's a different emotional inheritance, and Catherine is its architect. For the first time in decades, the British monarchy now regularly shows 3 generations of heirs, a visual triad designed to communicate stability. But this year, that image began to shift meaning. No longer was the focus solely on the male line of succession. Now, it is also on the woman shaping the space between them. Catherine is not just the Princess of Wales. She is the emotional frame around the sovereign present, the stabilizing middle, and the learning future. In the architecture of monarchy, she is becoming the connective tissue, the part you don't always name, but cannot function without. Following the ceremony, a YouGov survey measured public emotional response to the royal family's appearance. The results were telling. 61% of respondents said Catherine was the most emotionally resonant figure in the royal family. Only 14% named King Charles. 9% chose Prince William. One question asked, "Which royal made you feel most proud to be British during the cenotaph ceremony?" Catherine received nearly half of all votes, across all age groups, not because she did the most, but because she made people feel the most.